I love to teach quilting, and this perfect purple patchwork plaid is a great place for our new quilters to start. And if you've been quilting for a while, hey, I might even teach you also something new today. What do you think? Let's get started. Welcome to 2022, my official first quilting video for all of you. I am Rob Appell, official host right here at Making It Fun, National Sales Manager at Michael Miller Fabrics, and I am super excited to see all of you yet for another fantastic tutorial. Now, you know I love to teach quilting, and this is a very simple patchwork plaid project. We're going to do it in strip piece format, but I really am trying to answer some follow-up questions to some emails I've received recently about an older project I did way back when on Man Sewing in Greens that we called the Buffalo Plaid. And Buffalo Plaid is just a large scale check or plaid, and so I thought I would do this using some smaller strips in case maybe some of you wanted to burn up some of your strip rolls. Although these are actually 3-inch strips, and of course they're the Michael Miller basics. So we are using some fairy frost, some of the marble, and of course I love the cocoa, and you can see the way that all of the colors kind of blend together to make this project. I am halfway completed with this size quilt top. When it's done, it'll be roughly 42 by 46 inches. And in order to get there, I have used a half of a yard of the marble and the cocoa, and I've used a full yard of the fairy frost. So that's part of what I really want to help teach everybody is the supply list for this. It's a 3 fabric project to do the basics. Now, once you understand this technique, of course, you can grow your color palette and formula, and you can do wide strips and skinny strips and all that kind of stuff. Oh my goodness, I think we should probably make another tutorial on that down the road. Starting with the basics today, we're going to do 3 colors, and it's kind of equal parts. So if you want to see it like this, that I'm using equal amounts of strips of my dark and my light, and I'm also using equal amount of strips of my medium and my light, and it doesn't really matter which one you double up on, like I did on the light. You see what I'm saying here? So it's more like we're making rice here. It's 2 parts to 1 part. So one of the colors you're going to use twice as much of, and I really think that if you started with 1 yard each of 2 of the fabrics and then 2 yards of your background fabric, you're going to end up with a really nice twin size quilt. Super great place to practice your machine quilting, super fun, and this is also a skill builder project because really you're going to need to practice slowing down and also pressing, let's heat up the iron, cutting correctly, sewing correctly, all of these things. So let me walk you through the steps. It is real simple. And of course, you can do these in any color format, but when you're learning, it's really easy to stay monochromatic or in a single color family like we're doing with our perfect purple patchwork plaid today. Oh, wow, that's a lot of bees. So in order to do that, I have equally cut strips. I think I was saying these are actually 3-inch strips. Whatever you do, just make them all the same size and remember what size you made them because you may need more later, and you're going to definitely need to know that number in a bit. In order to sew them together, we're really going to go ahead and just start with a dark and a light, thinking per pile right now, even though I guess I've got my dark and my light in my hand. You know I love to start all my strips on one end and sew to the other. And I do that very effectively and efficiently by not water skiing behind my quilting fabric. So I'm just going to lower my presser foot. We're going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I'm actually going to keep my machine at a nice even pace. And I'm just going to go ahead and stitch on through. And anytime I feel like it's time to readjust, I'll stop. Let the machine come to a complete stop. Leave needle down function working if you have that. Readjust. Don't try to readjust while you're sewing. That's where we get mistakes and boo-boos. Because one of the keys to making that patchwork over there turn out so nice looking is to keep all of our points lining up. And it's very simple. If all of your cuts are the same size, all of your seam allowances are the same size, and all of our secondary cuts are the same size, it's really going to go together terrific. We just need to stay focused and take our time. So I'll go through and do this, and I'm using the 45-inch wide strips. And of course, you can do it with shorter strips, longer strips, however you like to do it. We're just doing equal width strips today. Now, the next step in getting our plaid prepared properly is to get it ironed right. So I actually need to clear off the space on the ironing board right now, because one of the keys to good ironing is having enough space to iron it properly. So I love this. This is an old piece of plywood covered in batting and fabric, and it happens to be obviously at least 45 inches long, which really helps. Now, to make it so that we can nest our seams in today's project, I'm just going to iron from where I started my light fabric, and I'm going to iron all the way down as I add on each row. So one of the other things I want you to hear is to help yourself make your patchworks turn out even nicer is do iron after every time you go to the sewing machine. I know there are times where we can chain piece. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about taking the time on a nice long seam like this to press open these two fabrics before I go ahead and add on the next fabric. Try not to distort the seams by pulling and tweaking and doing the things you're seeing me do right now. Bringing it in nice and straight there. Okay, and I just want to simply start on the end that I started on before, and therefore we are now here. I'm going to go to the light fabric because remember, I really started from the light side. That will really help me in my ironing process. I'm going to do both of the family sets from that light side. And I'm also going to go ahead and take the time to line up my selvages on both sides, because when I trim them down, that makes it so I waste the least amount of fabric as I'm getting started. So again, yes, I am starting all on the same side. We're not going up one side and back down the other. This really does work. Some of you may want to shorten your seam allowance a little bit, or shorten your stitch length, excuse me, down to a 2 millimeter. That really helps also. If you're finding that your fabric is not tracking very well, you're probably ready to clean out all that dust from underneath your feed dogs. Maybe you should go in for a real service. It might be about a good thing to do as a New Year's resolution. We haven't talked about resolutions yet this year, but maybe we should be talking about the resolution to keep our machines clean. Either way, I'm going to make it till I have all of these strips from both of my families done and show you what comes next. Okay, so you can see now I'm just finishing pressing out all of my strips. I've got two different sets. We have our dark and our light, and our medium and our light. And I've used 6 strips in each grouping, 3 of each color, because I truly believe it's important to pleasure ourselves while we quilt. There's no reason we should be making this harder than normal. So as I grab my ruler and my cutter, I want to point out most of the reason I didn't go much further is I don't want to go any further than the ruler is wide, or maybe you want to hear it as long, because I now am going to use that ruler to subcut these parts and pieces. So the first thing I'm going to do, because I'm right-handed, I want to trim off so that I have a good working edge over here. And what I'm doing is not worried so much about this side, but I'm worrying about the lines on my ruler. I want to make sure they're running nice and parallel to the lines I've created in my patchwork. That way I know that everything's going to cut and look nice and square. So once I've identified, especially that far up mark there, now I can go ahead and slide this right over. I can check everything else to make sure it's running nice and parallel, perpendicular, and I'm going to cut right through. That's clean, that's ready to go. And now, to make it easier on my body and safer on everything involved, let's just go ahead and rotate our fabric and start over. So now I'm coming in here, and like I said earlier, these are 3-inch strips. So my subcut is 3-inch. That way you get perfect squares when you go and put them back together. So now I'm watching this line here along the ruler, of course, but I'm also double checking to make sure that my perpendicular lines are running nice. And I'm going to go ahead and just take each strip set that we have here and slice it all down into 3-inch subcuts. Or if you're creating your own design, you're just making the subcuts the same width right now as you started with your strips. If you're cutting and you start to notice that it feels like we're getting out of perpendicular with our strip, one of the things you can do is come back and recheck all of these lines. And you can see right here, I've shifted. Something has gone not perfect. So now what I'm going to do, you have a couple of extra inches at the end. So being the 3-inch strips, that is. So now I just went ahead and trimmed this down, and now I can restart with a nice clean edge again. And what that really does, remember, it's keeping these units looking really nice and square as you're cutting. So don't be afraid to take a moment and recalibrate. That's why when we're cutting our patchwork, we are always cutting that first edge also, making sure that we create our own true cuts so that we have something to work with. And a lot of times when you're re-shifting these strips along the table, you'll find that that's when things will start to get out of skew. And you can see here, I'm going to have just enough to get that last 3-inch strip out of there, even though I had to make one of those adjustments. Now, as we're finishing up our cutting, I'm just going to go ahead and kind of organize my piles, right? They're all basically facing the same direction, some more organized than others. And for this project right here, now what you're really seeing actually is the strips coming together this way, right? And so what I ended up doing is I took 1, 2, and 3 from like piles, and now we're just going to join these light to dark, light to dark, light to dark real quick as we go to the sewing machine. Now at this point, if you're a chain piecer, I would recommend you just divide up your piles and you begin chain piecing just to save some of that thread and some of that time. So you could put in 2 together at a time, 2 here, grab another 2, make sure that that's going, and when I was done, I had 3 all together. Now, if you're gonna make this into a real twin or a queen size quilt, you may actually still wanna do it like this and then assemble your entire quilt top in quadrants, just keeping the bulk and making life a little easier on yourself. Now, once we've got all of our strips joined, no matter how long you're making them, we're going to need to go to the ironing. And this process at the ironing board, we should pay attention to what we're doing. Now, earlier I mentioned I was starting by sewing with all of the light strips and going in one direction to keep my seams, but now we've added a seam in the middle. So I'm just going to simply check right now. These seams are heading this way. So as I flip this over, I'm just going to make sure that I'm pressing the new seam allowance in the same direction all the other ones were flowing. And then as I do that, I'm going to stack these new extra long rows like we've got here just on the end of my board, and I'm going to keep them in like color families and heading in the same exact direction. Okay, so I come back down here, I'm just going to double check, making sure that all of my seams continue to flow in the same direction. Okay, and the importance to having all of them pressed and in the same direction is so we can really nest our seams. So now earlier I did mention I started with this lighter color fabric, and I guess still we're speaking relative terms. So as I bring this over into play now, really what I need to do is I need to take one of these that goes dark to light, and I need to take my second row and rotate it so it actually goes light to dark, so that this starts to form a checkerboard, or actually the plaid, because it's 3 color. But what that really does is on the back side of the fabrics, as we do this here, you can see, because we started by sewing with the lights and pressing with the lights, now my seams are actually doing this, which we refer to as nesting. So that's going to make it very easy for me to match up these points as I go along to just make the accuracy look nice on the project. So let me make sure I'm organized, which is going to be right sides together and a light with a dark with a light, so to speak. Go ahead and put those together. And now I'm just going to use my fingers. I kind of wiggle the seams, and I'm just going to start to line up these first 2, 3, maybe 4 seam allowances where the fabrics are now touching and nesting. And we're just going to do 1/4 inch seam allowances all over again. So everything has been consistent, just the same. Now, when you do this, you may find certain times we're going to have the seam allowance pointing down and getting caught slightly on that stitch foot, or the stitch plate is the word I'm looking for. Sorry, a lot of just information hit me at one time. So now as I'm coming along, you'll see I lift my fabric slightly. That got that bulk seam up underneath down there. I readjust as necessary. And then I can just do this each and every time. Of course, you're welcome to use straight pins. I've heard this is what they're for. I don't use them, because I just use this technique and it works very nicely. On the next pass, the seams will be even more in our favor just because of the way it works out, and I'll make sure that I'll iron after each and every row I assemble. Yes, and that is right, my quilting friends. If you just keep up and persevere, 120 some squares later, you just keep adding your rows, your opposite rows, matching up those nested seams, and you too can have a perfectly pieced purple patchwork plaid quilt. What do you think? Let's check it out. Okay. The big reveal. I'm pretty excited. So you can see I did go ahead and take the thing off the design wall, put it all together. Turned out fabulous. Super fun, super great, and easy project, and I hope you all learned a little something from me here today at Making It Fun. Just a quick reminder, we've also launched an incredibly awesome, well, we think it's fabulous, block of the month featuring an incredible pattern by Charisma Horton. It is called Fabulous. Each month we'll put up a new video all the way through August. Make sure you check out a local quilt shop, ask them for the pattern, ask them for the kit, ask them for all of the inspiration that you can also find right here at Making It Fun. We'll see you next time. Thanks again. Wow, you are still there. Thanks for sticking with me till the end of the video. I know, I get a little long-winded sometimes. But if you did enjoy today's video, make sure you check out a few of the other ones we've created. I think they're terrific. And of course, please subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit the little bell to be notified. I don't want you to miss a moment of the fun. Stay safe and happy sewing.